What's going on, ninjas? I am super excited to be here hosting this awesome space. Thanks everybody for joining. We will get the panelists up here on stage and then we will get things rolling. So, hope everyone's having a great day so far, and we will get started here in 1 or 2 minutes. All right, looks like we got Mirza up here on stage. Mirza, do you mind if we test your audio?
Yeah. Hey guys, how's it going?
Perfect, perfect. Awesome. And then we just need Pineapple team coming up on here, and then we'll get things kicked off.
Perfect.
Pineapple team, if you can hear this, I've invited you up here on stage. You can also try requesting, and I can just approve you there. All right, looks like we got the Pineapple team up here. Do you mind if we test your audio?
Yeah, absolutely. How are you?
Good morning. I think that's Shuba on the Pineapple account.
You got it.
Great. Great. Well, we have reached quorum, everybody. So a few quick housekeeping items before we get into introductions and start this conversation. First and foremost, everything on this spaces is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice. As always, that's a kind of a typical kind of standard thing here on the spaces that we host. And this is quite the special space that we're going to be hosting here today, everyone. We have Mirza from the Injective Foundation team, as well as Shuba, the CEO from Pineapple. And we're going to be diving into all things injective, all things digital asset treasuries, and just generally talk about the kind of institutional adoption that's happening, across crypto, but also here, right here on Injective. And so, without further ado, why don't we do a couple quick intros, and then we'll jump into some topics. And so, Mirza, if you want to do a quick intro, and then I'll pass it over to Shuba for another intro.
Yeah. Hey everyone. I mean, most people on the space know me. This is mainly for you guys to get to know Pineapple because there's a lot of confusion about how we're working together, what we're doing. But I'm Mirza, I run the business team. I've been here for over 5 years. Um, and you guys know Injective already. It's the preeminent blockchain built for finance. And really excited for the space and to tell you guys about what we're doing with the DAT. You guys saw a huge announcement probably like 10 days ago. And now a lot of things are about to be set into motion. So wanted to give you guys the quickest alpha and the latest alpha before the strategy begins.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll dive into topics. We'll start out high level, and then get into some greater detail for you guys, just so you have a greater understanding of like what's happening, what are these DATs, and how they work, and all those great things. So, before we jump into things, Shuba, why don't you give us a quick intro about yourself as well as Pineapple?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to. And pleasure to see everybody on this spaces and great to meet everybody. You guys probably don't know me as well as you know Mirza or at all. So I'll give you a quick introduction on myself. CEO of Pineapple. mortgage fintech company based out of Canada. We started building this company about a decade ago, working towards digitizing the mortgage landscape. It was a very archaic, paper-driven, manual process-driven industry. And over these last 10 years, we've been working on advancing technology integrations as well as introducing artificial intelligence into the space. We focus on everything from lead inception to document analysis, analyzing consumer data and determining what options are best suited for that customer, fraud analytics, all the way down to reservicing, mortgage renewals and refinances. So we're really looking forward to the next evolution of finance and mortgages and what it can become. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that in detail on this chat today. So I don't want to give away any spoilers, but great to be here, everybody. And I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Shuba, for the intro there. And you're absolutely right. We will be diving into more of those topics. But let's maybe start here, you guys. Obviously, DATs have really kind of swept the landscape across crypto, right? We first sort of saw the original OG sort of DAT with strategy, and have quickly seen that spread to other sort of Bitcoin treasuries as well as Ethereum and other altcoins. And it's really becoming quite a popular sort of area of finance, particularly seeing these new vehicles for institutions to access these digital assets in a compliant way. And so I guess why don't we start very high level, Mirza? Can you just maybe explain real quick, like what is a digital asset treasury and how that really differs from a corporate treasury perspective?
Yeah, sure. I'll give a very simple explanation and then I'll dive into details. So the simplest way to understand it is a digital asset treasury basically is when a company makes a concerted effort to do more than just purchasing the token, right? So you've probably seen corporate treasuries where you have guys like Tesla who have purchased Bitcoin. You've seen things like Metaplanet who have purchased Bitcoin. So those are corporate treasuries, meaning they just keep Bitcoin or other assets in their balance sheet. Typically, you see it with Bitcoin. Now, digital asset treasuries became interesting because they were a vehicle for institutions to sort of access your token who might not be able to. What that basically means is, let's say you have a firm on Wall Street and they're sitting on the sidelines because they don't have all the rails set up to purchase your token on Coinbase or Binance, right? Most corporations will never do that. Most family offices won't do that. So what's basically happening is you have these companies, such as Pineapple today with Injective, who've gone out and said, hey, we will raise money just to purchase this token, but we will also use a set of asset managers to do things like staking to provide investors with additional yield. So just by purchasing shares of, let's say, Pineapple, a investor effectively gets exposure into the INJ yield. They get exposure to asset managers. So we'll talk about it later in the space, but we have two amazing asset managers who are basically going to be purchasing the INJ and then staking it on behalf of the investor. So it's just a bit more sophisticated than just keeping INJ on a balance sheet. And most importantly, and we'll get into it in a bit, it's important to understand that this is a vehicle for INJ to effectively get onto Wall Street. Like many of you know that Canary filed an ETF for us. I'll also leak some more alpha. Like we have a couple more ETF filings coming, which is great. But as all of you know, ETFs take a while to get processed. They could take many months. So Pineapple today is effectively a proxy for that ETF because effectively by owning Pineapple or by going onto Wall Street and being able to access it, you're getting direct exposure into the injective token because now the vast majority of the balance sheet of Pineapple will be converted into INJ out of that $100 million raised, and we'll get into the specifics. But that's really the core differentiator. It's a DAT effectively is a much more sophisticated strategy to purchase the token, to stake the token, and to pass on that yield to traditional stock investors without them having to, go through bridging or go through setting up a wallet. They're just getting that yield directly from the asset managers.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love it. Thanks for kind of setting the stage there, Mirza. And then, moving in a little bit deeper, I'd love to pivot to Shuba and ask, why did Pineapple specifically choose Injective and INJ to deploy into, right? Other than, the traditional ones that have been a lot more sort of ubiquitous, right, with the Bitcoin or the Ethereum. Why Injective specifically?
Yeah, of course, and that's a question, obviously, that really was sitting on our minds and weighing on our minds as we were looking at all of the various DAT strategies and all of the other transactions that were taking place. And quickly, before I answer that question specifically, just to kind of piggyback a little bit off of what Mirza was saying, the capital markets world of Wall Street has been an exceptional industry to help business and help, other areas thrive through access to capital and having access to public markets and public treasury. And I think with these digital asset strategies, one thing that I'm very excited about and happy to see is that we're beginning to move blockchain and cryptocurrencies into the mainstream and allowing, the public to have access to these where they may otherwise not. So creating a little more fairness and a little more equality. We're glad to be, participants in that. So why did Pineapple specifically choose Injective? Well, when we're looking at the landscape and looking at what we do and the evolution that we've had in the mortgage landscape through digitizing it, the next, obvious for us was mortgages on chain. And what would the future of mortgages on chain look like? What would the future of financial services on chain look like? And throughout that process and our research and discovery, we're very fortunate to come across the team at Injective and Injective's labs. And being a finance first blockchain, the synergies were just immense right from day one, and the opportunities for us to not only build an INJ token that strategy within our business, but also then being able to put mortgages on chain and being able to look at other financial services strategies towards the future became very exciting for us. And for us, progress is the most important thing. And I think, the collaboration between Pineapple and Injective has just incredible opportunity for progress in the world.
Excellent. Hey, thanks, Shuba, for kind of outlining that for the audience here. Um, you know, do you mind, either of you, do you mind maybe going, really kind of diving into the details with regards to, again, like I kind of reiterated before, Bitcoin sort of DATs and ETFs are sort of ubiquitous at this point. Ethereum DATs and ETFs are becoming ubiquitous as well. And what is maybe the differentiator here between sort of the INJ DAT and some of these other ones? I think you've kind of touched on it with some kind of staking, uh, properties, but is there any other thing that you could point to that's like, hey, here's how we're really kind of differentiating these as far as the vehicle and deal structure goes?
Yeah, sure. I can explain the staking, et cetera side, but I'd love Shiva to chime in on some of the synergies that we saw with the business. So Injective is unique in that its yield is way higher than many other chains. So when you look at the Injective yield or staking yield today, it sets at about 12%, right? If you look at something like an ETH, it's sitting at around 4%, which is not necessarily attractive, especially as the interest rate environment is going down now. Um, which means effectively like it's just not a competitive yield in the open market. So effectively what we're telling traditional Wall Street investors is, hey, there's an asset which represents on-chain finance and you're getting a 12% yield, which is very hard to beat. Obviously people on Wall Street don't know much about staking. They don't care much about security or anything. They don't know that stuff. They care about yield and they care about generating passive yield in the form of getting dividends on their stock. So that's one thing that makes Injective very, very unique because what these asset managers will do, and we have two asset managers on this, right? So we have Canary Capital, which, as you guys know, filed for our ETF. We also have Monarch, which you guys might not know, but they manage one of the largest Bitcoin DATs today. And what these two asset managers will effectively do is take that INJ, stake it on the network, and also run interesting strategies, like let's say loop staking, etc., to juice up that yield even more. So just by owning PAPL stock or the PAPL stock, you're getting exposure to this yield. That's hard to beat. So that's number one. Number two, the differentiator comes down to some of the synergies we saw with the business itself. And I'll let Shubha chime in more, but effectively, when we were exploring the entire landscape and we were approached by so many different companies, because a lot of companies are interested in deploying sort of DAT strategies. But the issue I had personally with DATs in general is you're effectively getting some random shell that has nothing to do with finance or crypto that's just trying to ride the crypto wave. So with many of these companies, not to call anyone out, you saw random biotech companies, you saw cancer research companies, you saw random like cannabis businesses all trying to deploy suddenly into a DAT strategy, which makes no sense if you really think about it. It's like, why would a weed company suddenly start buying crypto? Yeah, other than just to like ride the crypto wave. So it didn't make much long-term sense. And unfortunately, this has not gone well with the SEC or the NASDAQ or the NYSE because many of these things are also starting to get delisted. So we recently saw one cannabis company, DAT, get delisted because it just didn't make any sense. So people are catching on. So we wanted to make sure that there was a lot of sector alignment when we worked with a company, and Pineapple is just that. It's I think this is the first that where it's an actual fintech company with an actual multi-billion dollar business. And I want Shubha to sort of chime in here and talk about that business and what we plan on doing with Pineapple and Injective.
Yeah, thanks, Marissa. I think that you hit the nail on the head. And again, not to call anybody out, but there was a lot of misalignment of what type of businesses or underlying businesses were looking to enter the DAT strategy space, and a lot of that was we were in our infancy, and people didn't know the direction that DATs would go. How significant they would become. And they were early stage, discoveries, let's call it. But as they began to mature, as the strategy began to mature, and by maturing, I mean we're still only a few months in, right? So we're not, that deep. But we're able to really discover that that type of a strategy wasn't going to have long-term accretive value towards both parties. So, Mirza mentioned the yield, great for us, great for the shareholders, great for the token holders. But what was also very integral and very important in this transaction was how can we make sure that the businesses line up? How can we, one, make sure that the underlying business is strong? Because that's important from a regulatory perspective. Mirza referenced um, strength on their balance sheet. They have revenue coming in. They have a real business that's underlying the debt. And for us, we're originating over $3 billion a year in mortgages right now. We've built one of the leading technology platforms being used across Canada to fund and originate mortgages. We've been the first leader in AI integration into the mortgage landscape. So all of those boxes check off. Then, when you consider what the future potential is with the strategy being connected to real world assets and how that can evolve, into tokenization and into the real estate market and into the mortgage finance market into the future, I mean, the potential is just so immense. And I think that's really the key differentiator. We are the first DAT strategy on record right now where it's not just a DAT strategy, but there's actually a follow-on business strategy that's underlying it.
No, that's very well said. And I can't stress like how significant that is because if you think about it, Pineapple already had this really core existing business generating billions of dollars in mortgage loans. So if we're able to digitize and tokenize those assets on Injective, that's immense, both from a TVL perspective, from a adoption perspective. It would effectively 100x in Injective adoption in every single possible way in it and give us that stamp of approval that we've been seeking, right? Like you're getting a lot of people talk about tokenizing assets and you see effectively zero demand, right, for these tokenized assets. No one's effectively trading them on chain. The across the board, I think Injective today leads the the tokenized stock landscape. Even that's just a blip on the radar, right? It's doing like $2 billion to date, which is great, which is way higher than every other platform out there. But at the same time, in the grand scheme of things, the stock market is doing that every minute. For us to get that adoption, we really felt like Pineapple is an amazing vehicle for this because yes, they're purchasing INJ in the open market, which is fantastic. But at the same time, if they tokenize these assets on our chain, we immediately get way higher leverage and way more adoption than every other chain that exists today out there. So that's, I think, the most compelling part about the Pineapple strategy and why the foundation and Injective are so behind it as well.
Mirza, just to note on that, it's not if we bring mortgage data and mortgages on chain, it's when. We will make that happen, and we will be the first to do it here at Injective and Pineapple.
Fantastic. No, those are great points, you guys, and appreciate kind of you shining a spotlight on those areas that this is more than just a sort of vanilla DAT, and how sort of there's a dual structure here. Moving to a little bit about maybe from the user and or like investor perspective, Mirza, I think you touched on it a little bit, but like what is the main difference here of like why should an investor sort of purchase shares in a DAT versus just like going to a DEX and purchasing INJ directly?
Yeah, no, excellent question. And obviously, I'll try to dance around the legality of me answering this question. But there's two things, right? So, like for everyone on this call, most of us know INJ, right? We know exactly how to open up a Binance Coinbase account. We know exactly how to get INJ via Helix or a decentralized exchange. We know that stuff. But the average person has no idea how to do that. Like the average person has no idea how to create a crypto wallet, how to do bridging, how to set up, like going through the hurdles of a Coinbase account. A lot of boomers or traditional people or family offices are just going to call up their bank or their brokerage account and buy stocks that way or buy shares that way. So this is effectively a way for us to reach that base of investors that typically wasn't there for us before. That's number one, just being able to reach a different investor base. Secondly, it's to minimize the hurdles needed to get that yield that I was mentioning earlier. A lot of us are well educated and we know exactly how to stake on chain and earn that yield ourselves, but a lot of people have no idea how to do that. So imagine it's as easy as you opening up your Robinhood account and just with the PAPL share, you get access to that yield. You don't have to go through the complexities of learning about crypto, so it just opens up these new rails for us onto Wall Street, onto institutions. And most importantly, it's compliance. A lot of these institutions are actually quite qualified, like and way more educated on crypto than you guys could believe. They know exactly how to set up a MetaMask account and stake, etc. But they can't do it for the company accounts because the company accounts don't recognize DeFi or we still haven't gotten the green light from DC for companies to be able to participate into DeFi in a big way. So for those companies and with the billions and trillions of dollars on the sidelines, this is the way that they're accessing these digital assets. And that's why MicroStrategy often trades at a higher multiple than Bitcoin itself, because a lot of these family offices are just purchasing MicroStrategy stock, and then MicroStrategy is using their asset managers to go and buy Bitcoin on behalf of these asset managers who can't buy Bitcoin directly. So it's really about that. It's about opening up access to yield. It's about opening up access to institutions and also everyday retail investors who might not know about crypto.
And piggybacking off of that, Mirza, you've touched on a couple points here, and I want to make sure that if there's any sort of new people coming to the space, learning about Injective, learning about Pineapple, can you maybe just shine a light quickly on sort of the Injective's infrastructure and how it's kind of uniquely positioned to support the DAT and just the broader sort of institutional adoption of crypto as well?
Yeah, I mean, everyone on this call probably knows, but Injective is a blockchain specifically catering to finance. I think, especially for the Pineapple case, what we provide that other blockchains don't is a set of core modules like our central limit order book, our real world asset module, etc. So when Pineapple wants to come and tokenize these assets like mortgages, they can do it on Injective far more easily than on any other chain, because it's as simple as them coming on with the asset, and we already have set up all the rails to be able to take those shares. Like we have set up the KYC rails, we've set up the rails with the custody providers. And it's way simpler than on any other chain where you have to go through those hurdles to tokenize those assets. And the second part is just the secondary trading and the liquidity aspect, because you guys might have noticed like our open interest has gone up significantly over the coming weeks. So we've integrated a lot more institutions than before, with a lot of huge guys, like let's say even Falcon X or Galaxy Digital now starting to participate on chain on Injective in a big way. So you're seeing that liquidity inflow come in. So when we end up tokenizing these mortgages or tokenizing other assets on chain, you have access to this core central limit order book and this liquidity layer. And most importantly, and what I'm really excited about is as our EVM goes live in Q4, we also any of those dApps will be able to leverage this. So it's not just about tokenizing the asset, it's about unlocking utility for those tokenized assets. And I mentioned this many times, but it shouldn't go amiss, because effectively a lot of companies are just creating replicas of what already exists on Wall Street, but an average person doesn't care about buying stocks on chain or buying anything else on chain. What they care about is different utilities they get, whether they can trade it on leverage, whether they can take a loan out against those tokenized stocks or tokenized assets. So imagine you could put mortgages on chain and use it as collateral to trade derivatives. You could use it to take loans out against. So that those secondary market utilities is where Injective really shines, because not only do we have the modules to allow people to come and tokenize assets, but you can also enable a lot more secondary market utility, whether it be perpetual trading, derivatives, taking loans out against it, trading binary options against these assets. The world is basically your oyster, and I think that's what crypto people really want. They don't just want a replica of what exists. They want to see, hey, what is the next level or second order of thinking that we can enable with crypto? And that's really what's going to attract everyday users, in my opinion. It won't just be, hey, you can now trade Tesla on chain. That's not what's going to bring an average person on chain.
Absolutely. No, I think we've kind of covered the foundation there, you guys, and hopefully that gives everybody a good idea of sort of what's happening with the INJ DAT and just DATs in general. Let's maybe dive sort of one layer deeper and get into the specifics of of the sort of INJ DAT and maybe some of the inspiration. So, Shuba, as you were sort of exploring this DAT strategy for Pineapple, what were some of maybe the inspiration you took, right? Like what were some of the other DATs that you maybe pulled inspiration from? And then, what was sort of your approach when approaching this topic and getting it across the finish line?
Yeah, and I think inspiration's an interesting word in this context because, inspiration was more of introduction in this world because I think, what Pineapple and Injective have done here is just so different and so groundbreaking that I don't know if anybody or anyone specific that strategy necessarily inspired how we accomplish this and what we intend to accomplish going forward. But there's certainly been a few that have inspired us to look into this and to begin processing what can be done here. There were some great ones like Bitminer, Upexi, DeFi Dev Corp, which were some of the first ones. I think that was originally Janover. Was the company that was underlying it. Those were some of the first ones that we were kind of, really looking at and kind of getting excited that, hey, this can be done. It can be done in a big way, and maybe it can be done in a different way. Um, and those really got us introduced to the world of DAO strategies. They showed us that they can be successful. They showed us where some of the challenges lied as well. Being able to learn from some of the predecessors and some of the mistakes that happened, what the industry really engaged with versus what they didn't, what the investor base liked versus what they didn't like, where did they respond well, where did they respond poorly. So we were able to make those adjustments in real time and ensure that our transaction and our DAT strategy was really built off of some of the gaps and some of the challenges that were discovered ahead of us. So I think we're sitting on really solid footing today. I think we've been able to be inspired and learn from a lot of the predecessors. And I think that we have an incredible opportunity to set the stage for what a lot of other future companies might want to use as the blueprint.
Absolutely. Yeah, and speaking of that, as you were going down this path, after you decided, hey, this is the right strategy for us, when you started going down that path and you started considering, asset managers and custodians and sort of all the partners involved, right? Because it's more than just sort of one person involved or one entity. It's multiple entities that really, made this happen and sort of brought everything together. What did you really look for in these partners, and like what maybe attributes did you look for, and what ultimately led you to sort of picking the partners that you end up picking?
Well, something I love to say in the world of business, there's a saying that says it takes a child to, or sorry, it takes a village to raise a child. I always say it takes a village to build a business. And, there's nothing different in this or anything else that we're going to see. It takes a village. There's incredible people behind the scenes, incredible organizations, and everybody playing their role to make sure that this comes to life. And the asset managers, the custodians, and everybody else that's been involved or that needs to be involved in this is no different. So, what are some of the things that we look at? And, we can talk about this from a professional perspective, obviously, of some of the skill sets and some of the things that we need. But the first place that we really love to start is people. That's just been a philosophy and a mandate at Pineapple. We want to make sure that we're aligning with the right people that have the right morals, the right values, the right ethics, and we're all working towards the same goals. Because if we're working towards different goals and different paths, that at some point we're going to veer off, we're going to create a fork in the road, and it's going to just extend and get larger and larger. But if we're aligned, if we're working in parallel, if we're working in sync with the right synergies and the right values behind us, the opportunity is immense. So the first thing that we really look for is that character in people. Who are the people we're working with? Are they aligned towards the same goals? And are we all working towards the right destination? Once we've achieved that, and once we found synergistic paths from that perspective, we'll look towards the skill sets and the credibility of the organizations that we're aligning with. We want to make sure that they have some history of what they've achieved and what they've accomplished. We want to make sure that they continue to stay driven towards success, maintaining that high standard. We want to make sure that they have incredible levels of experience. Compliance is important to us in our world, risk management, etc. So we just start going through the list of, now what do we need for this person to actually be effective in their role? And I think the team we put together, Mirza, correct me if I'm wrong, it's, the best of the best. And I think that we have an amazing group here behind us.
No, it's absolutely correct. Like we you guys have no idea how much work went into the construction of this behind the scenes over the last 3, 4 months. You guys might have noticed I've been like awfully quiet on Twitter the last few months, like way more than usual. But basically, we selected the best of the best in every category. So for the asset managers, we got Canary and we got Monarch. Monarch has run up some of the best stats out there for Bitcoin. Those stats are all trading above MNAV. It's actually fantastic what they've done. So they'll be making or helping with purchasing the INJ. Canary is helping with staking the INJ. They do it for ETH and so many of the largest chains. And on the advisory front, we got some of the best as well, whether it be Josh Lim, who runs Falcon X, previously was running Galaxy Digital. We also have Vanessa, who previously ran CoinFund and Consensus. So we really have some of the best people around the table to help us, not only in purchasing the INJ, but also in making sure that, hey, this has the right governance structure, this has the right alignment. And speaking of alignment, and you normally don't see this on DATs, me, Cooper, Eric all sit on the advisory board of Pineapple just to ensure that the treasury strategy is sort of maintained long term, that INJ is sort of a focal point for this company long term. Not that it already isn't, of course, Shuba and everyone else is aligned, but that's the type of commitment we're making. And when you see the S1 come out, you'll also notice that the foundation, Eric, me, we put in quite a bit of our money as well into this just to show our support long term. We also locked ourselves up long term, that you normally don't see in these DATs. Normally in these DATs, even the foundation founders get unlocked within the first 30 days. We did nothing like that. We locked ourselves up for over a year, and are more than willing to lock ourselves up for even longer because we're in it for the long haul. Like even with INJ, we've been here for 5+ years. And you normally don't see that in crypto. You don't normally see a long-term outlook. People are just, not to be crass, looking for get rich quick schemes in this space, which I think detracts a lot from what this space could be and the adoption I see coming for the years and decades to come for this space. And I want Injective and INJ to be a staple of that category defining industry. It's not about being a flash in the pan and whatever bullshit people talk about for the next week in crypto, but still being here 5 years from now and still being a top project and going up even more and more over time, both from a recognition and brand perspective, but also from an adoption perspective. That's really what we're all here for. So that's why we also surrounded ourselves on this board with the custody provider, everyone, with some of the best, because these people are also the same long-term minded individuals that we want around the table. So yeah, that's how we sort of came to it, and how we created the DAT in the first place.
And just Mirza, quickly to not skim over the significance of what you just said, you know, the fact that the foundation and the people involved are so heavily invested, they have skin in the game. That is another very significant key differentiator in this transaction. Locked up, invested, and believing in what we're building, not just looking for a short-term liquidity strategy, but actually building something of substance here. And you know, we talked earlier about differentiators, and I think that's one that's often not talked about as much as it should be in this deal.
Yeah, no, and it will become more and more clear. I think, and this is me, actually, I will just call out a bunch of people now. I think a lot of these DATs are absolute Ponzi. So what's happening is, and if you guys look into what's happening with the actual money, the money's not actually going into the open market on most of these DATs. What's happening is people are buying out locked tokens from investors or founders, etc., and founders are getting liquidity via the shares. Basically, just to put it simply, founders, let's say, that are locked up or have locked tokens, are taking their locked tokens, putting it into the treasury and getting shares that are freely unlocked, so they can sell the shares in the open market and get early liquidity for their tokens, which is an absolute scam. I think INJ is very different because obviously INJ has been fully circulating for years now. There's no more locked tokens. There's no more locked investors who can run this kind of scam. And actually, all the capital that was raised is going directly into INJ, into the open market. So I think that's very, very different from other DATs that you see. And it's very important. And I think investors and retail is also catching on to this, to look into this and where the money is actually going, and making sure it's in the right place. So I think that alignment, that long-term alignment, and making a clean structure is extraordinarily rare. Let alone like doing something with Pineapple Injective where we have actual business synergy on the tokenization front. So all in all, like this just checked a lot of boxes for us that a lot of other DAT strategies simply do not today.
Awesome, you guys. Yeah, I think everyone can really tell the synergies here, and that one quote that I think encapsulates what was just said in a very poignant way is Naval said, play long-term games with long-term people, and I think that's really what's going on here. It's that we're both locked in for the long term on sort of making this happen, and gonna ride sort of the wave as long as it'll take us with regards to institutional adoption and really expanding the horizons with regards to bringing this all on chain and making this a successful sort of collaboration here. And so with that being said, now maybe let's jump into some of the purchase strategy, as much as we can really discuss here. But everyone has been sort of pinging us on Twitter and Discord and every channel basically, and is asking, "Hey, you've raised this 100 million. What now? When will the INJ purchases begin?" Can you maybe set up kind of the roadmap or give the folks here a bit of an idea of like what happens next?
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to touch on. Oh, go ahead, Marissa.
Oh no, both of us can go. So yeah, I know. So I know this is the question on everyone's mind, like, hey, when will you guys start buying INJ? So what we plan on doing is we can't, and I think a lot of people want this, they want an exact date, but based on legal compliance, like we can't give people an exact date because they might front run our trade. So effectively what we're planning on doing is we will start deploying the capital, and as we deploy the capital, we'll publicly announce it on Twitter. Pineapple will announce it on Twitter. But rest assured, you will see it much sooner than you think. That's all I'll say. I can't give an exact date because that would be going against fiduciary duties. But yeah, I mean, it will be made public. You'll be able to see it. But I'll let Shuba touch on it because obviously there's huge legal quagmires if I talk about buying INJ in any way. So maybe Shuba can touch on it.
Well, the same goes. So, I think you hit it on the head. We're definitely going through the process right now. We're following all of the proper regulatory and compliance channels. We're ensuring that everything is being met with the regulators and the various exchanges that are involved. And very shortly, you'll expect to see momentum on that side. So, yeah, we're not going to give an exact date here today, but it's certainly in process and just going through the standard protocols, you could say.
Yeah, perfect. And I know we can't talk about specific dates and things of that nature, but is there any sort of maybe different accumulation strategy that's employed here that's maybe different than some of these other DATs out there?
Yeah, I mean, alluded to this earlier. The biggest difference is we're actually the asset managers will actually just be purchasing INJ in the open market, so through the same sexes indexes that you know and love. Um, un Unlike other ones where the money's actually going to the foundation, etc., none of the money that was raised is going back to the Injective Foundation in any way. It's not going back to me or Eric in any way. All of this is made public. So I think that's the biggest difference, the fact that we're just going to deploy it in the open market to acquire these assets, which I think is the best thing for any DAT to be able to do. But unfortunately, only 1% of DATs today do that, where they purchase the token in the open market. MicroStrategy is the best example of it, where they're just purchasing in the open market, and so is Bitmine. So we really think those are some of the best examples, unlike some of these other DATs that have come out that are not really doing it and are doing more nefarious things out there.
Yeah, and there's a saying where if you want to know the truth, just follow the money. And I think that your point is just that. If you follow the money of, what's happening here and what the business is doing, the foundation is not getting rich. The founders at Pineapple are not getting rich. This is a long-term vision. This is a long-term plan and a long-term strategy to do right by the investors and those that believe in this strategy and what we're looking to achieve with it.
100%. Yeah, thank you guys. Moving to a bit, let's maybe zoom out a little bit from the actual sort of INJ DAT and move into more of the, institutional adoption of crypto at a very high level. With I think it was Ernst and Young published a report recently that said essentially 83% of institutional investors are planning to increase their crypto allocations this year and moving forward. And so, with regards to maybe high level trends and things you're seeing, what are the most compelling in your mind?
Yeah, I'm just going to kick off with maybe just a very quick story on that note, and I just want to rewind the clock. Maybe we have some of the Pineapple audience on here as well. Maybe about a decade ago into the mortgage landscape, and I just want to kind of draw some similarities from it. So, about a decade ago, and when we started funding mortgages, we reached out to the investor community, and at the time, if you wanted to invest in a mortgage, you need to have a minimum $200 million check size. You're buying it through bonds or covered bonds and securitization, et cetera. I won't go into the intricacies and detail to bore everybody with it, but you have to be a huge investor. And we started going to the retail level and we started talking to investors about, hey, did you know that you can lend money and earn incredible return? Let's call it yield for the purposes of this conversation. And the yield was very similar to what INJ is currently returning in or around, let's say, 12% on a mortgage. So we started talking to all these people, and I started talking to my family and my friends and, accountants and lawyers and all these professionals. And none of them knew how to do it. None of them knew what opportunity was available. None of them even knew how to gain access to it, how to underwrite a loan, how to originate it, how to service it, etc. So we essentially built the framework for that in the early days. And we started bringing and raising capital from all these, retail level investors that didn't otherwise, how to enter that space and how to accomplish that goal. So what we were able to do there is very similarly, what we're looking to accomplish here with allowing those that might not be overly familiar with the crypto space here in the early days to have access and have involvement. And, like the Ernst and Young report that was just referenced, Deloitte referenced that there's a $4 trillion, real estate tokenization market upon us right now. And as we're seeing more and more people begin to enter the space, we do also have to acknowledge that outside of the early adopters in this industry, that most citizens don't understand. They don't know and they don't understand where they'll be involved or how they'll be involved. So, where do we see a lot of this starting? We see it starting from the high level, from the institutional perspective, where they're going to act like we are as custodians for other people's investments into an area and an arena that they might not otherwise have acknowledgement or involvement about. As more and more infrastructure gets laid over time, and as more and more things get built upon that infrastructure that regular everyday people can see, feel, touch, understand, they'll become more and more involved. And I think what's happening today is that the infrastructure is being laid for the future to be built upon. And something I've been saying a lot is that tomorrow starts today, and we are building. People just don't see what's being laid right now. So that's kind of my take on it. But Mirza, I'm sure you have a lot more insight.
No, I think that's extraordinarily well allocated and said. So I think the most interesting trend for me actually is the regulatory perspective of it, which we've been sort of working really hard on. We, as many of you know, not only did we file ETFs, like Canary filed an ETF, the SEC now opened up the review period on it, but also our policy papers are getting accepted by the SEC. We published one on DeFi. We plan on publishing more on tokenization on lending, real estate lending specifically, in the coming weeks, which we again hope the SEC will accept and look into. So I think that regulatory green light, especially with the Clarity Act, with the Genius Act, have really helped open up these gateways for institutions because I know what's happening behind the scenes. I talk to these banks in New York. I talk to these family offices. A lot of them want to get in on the space because the reality is um, they think that crypto is one of the best performing asset classes, right? Full stop. In the last decade, Bitcoin is the best performing asset out there. And they want to be allocated not just into Bitcoin, but also altcoins, etc., because many of them serve a different purpose. But they've just been sidelined, not because they don't know and don't want to purchase, but because that regulatory clarity was lacking. But now that these sort of green lights have been given by the government, with the president directly participating in crypto in a big way, whether you like him or not politically matters less, but it's obviously a fact that he has opened up a pathway for crypto adoption, which is great for the world. And now you see many major nations starting to adopt because the US is leading. Injective is also an America First company. So it's a great boon for us because now we are a beacon of hope and an example. And that's where I think the institutional money or trend that you will see in a huge way in the coming years specifically, because what's going to happen next year politically is the midterm elections are coming up in the US. And as soon as midterm elections come up, you will see that Republicans and Democrats alike will try to get a lot of bills, et cetera, passed because many senators and many Congress people know that they might not be here after the midterm election ends. So you will see a lot more movement in the world of crypto. Behind the scenes, what's happening is extraordinary. Like the Genius Act and the Clarity Act pales in comparison to what's happening with the rate cuts, what's happening with regulatory clarity, and you'll just see that trend continue, not just in tokenization, but actual sort of institutions coming on chain, participating in these DATs. And that's why Injective wants to be a first mover on all fronts. Like we had the infra for it, and the institutions were sort of sidelined, and now we actually have exposure on Wall Street where institutions can get access. So I think that's really the trend I'm most curious about to see, where like with all this regulatory hurdles being sort of met or being escaped, how much further can we go as an industry in the coming years?
Yeah, thank you, Mirza. You talk to all these institutions, you talk to these banks, day in and day out. You're on sort of phone calls and Zooms and all that. What when you talk to them, what do you think? What do they tell you with regards to like what makes INJ so compelling, and how do those products, like the DAT, like the ETF, affect us? Part of all those that are part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So basically, a couple things, right? ETF, the DAT, is a stamp of approval, first and foremost. It just shows that Injective is a legitimate asset in the world of crypto. It's been here and it's now being accepted on Wall Street in a big way. And I think that's really what opens the floodgate for us as an ecosystem where institutional money can participate, where everyday retail investors can participate, even if they don't know crypto or they don't know all the crypto jargon, right? That's the first point. The second thing that they really care about Injective is a couple different things. One, they really tend to care about the fact that Injective is a fully circulating token. When we were doing the roadshow to raise capital for this DAT, that's one of the main things that people love. It's like, oh my God, we've seen so many of these tokens pitch us, but most of them are trying to sell us their locked tokens or doing some other shady things. But Injective is fully unlocked. You guys have been here for so long and you guys have done amazing work from building performant infrastructure that works. The second thing that they care about is the fact that institutions have already integrated with us in a big way. Most of these other chains don't necessarily have all these different market makers, all these different institutions integrated, like Jump, Galaxy, Falcon X. These guys are not participating on other chains in such a coordinated way, which I think also is a huge stamp of approval for us that institutions tend to care about. And they also care about the metrics. They care about the fact that so much of the supply is staked on chain, which you don't really see in many other chains. Many other chains, only 25 to 30% of the supply is staked, but with Injective, way more than that is staked. Over 50% of the chain is currently staked on chain, which they tend to love. And they also care a lot about the revenue metrics. So the revenue meta is new in crypto, right? I think Hyperliquid really is leading the way when it comes to the revenue meta, and so are many other companies out there. But one thing many people don't realize is Injective is the best performing asset when it comes to revenue. So when you look at our fully diluted valuation, and compare it against other companies, whether it be Solana or ETH, we trade at a much, much better multiple than those, which effectively for these institutions means that Injective is undervalued. And they care a lot about this because in the world of finance, in the world of TradFi, they care not just about how much revenue you make, but also the fact that you are trading at an attractive multiple. And that's what attracted many of them to invest into the DAT because they effectively realized that, hey, Injective um, is primed for disruption and it's leading in many metrics, whether it be revenue, whether it be adoption metrics, whether it be new infrastructure stack that they're developing with the multi-VM layer, etc. I think all these things combined really spoke to the institutions, and what I think will be hugely beneficial for us in the months and years to come.
And then I know we are almost at the top of the hour, so last question for you guys, and I'd love sort of insight from both of you. Almost as many institutions, so about 74%, plan to engage with on-chain finance in the next 2 years, and these are sort of large institutions, right? These are multi-billion, multi-trillion dollar, AUM institutions, plan to engage with DeFi within 2 years. In your view, what does the convergence of TradFi and DeFi actually look like?
Um, from our perspective, it looks like exactly what we're seeing today, which is first, a stamp of approval and first, an integration into the mainstream. you know, in other industries, we see it happening all around us. And if we just take one, you know, from Bezos and Musk, you know, from the space side of it, you know, they're laying an infrastructure that we may or may never even see in our lifetime of what's going to be built upon it and what's going to be used upon it. You know, the infrastructure of blockchain and of crypto is there. It exists. It's already been built, and now it's up to, you know, those participants, the industries, and everybody else involved to be able to start building and bringing that up to the mainstream. So the first aspect of the convergence of traditional finance to DeFi is that stamp of approval, that credibility, and that visibility of an existing infrastructure that can now be utilized and built upon. From that point forward, you know, it's going to take industry leaders and forward thinkers from the TradFi space to be able to say, hey, how can we start, you know, looking at DeFi strategies? How can we start looking at on-chain strategies? And how can we begin evolving our businesses to tomorrow's world of finance, which, you know, again, is clearly moving in this direction and with the spirit of DeFi at heart. So I think the convergence of it is going to, it's going to be a work in progress. It's going to take some effort from the current TradFi industry being able to forward think and future proof themselves, but it's also going to be met with, you know, significant DeFi players that are going to want to encroach upon their territory. And that's healthy. That competition is healthy. It's healthy for progress. It's healthy for the betterment of what we're all trying to build. And I think that we're upon it right now. So that's just a very high level from our side of it. But Mirza, off to you.
I think that's perfectly encapsulated. I think the most simplest way to put it, and I'll only spend like 20 seconds talking about this, because I mentioned it many times, but I think the best convergence would be when you don't realize that something is crypto. And I think that's what's missing in the space, where everyone is trying to convince you to like, hey, switch over on chain, like switch over to decentralized tech. But if it takes like 50 hops to do this stuff, no one's going to do it. And that's why I think adoption across crypto is lackluster. Like, you only have maybe a couple million real DeFi users out there, right? It's not immense. Even a normal social media app has like billions of users, and if not at least hundreds of millions on any app. Even for you to raise like a Series B or C at a traditional consumer company, you likely need more than 5 million active users. I would be hard pressed to see if DeFi even has that. I think the biggest issue and the biggest thing people have missed out on, and the thing that Injective is trying to fix is we want to be the rails behind the scenes where you could be trading on a platform, or you could be using a private equity shop, or you could be using your traditional bank account, and Injective and crypto is the rails behind the scenes that you don't necessarily see. That's the real convergence. It's not about DeFi replacing TradFi in any way. It's what can DeFi unlock for TradFi that previously wasn't possible, where previously maybe you were able to get mortgages, and Pineapple's done a great job at that. But maybe now you can use your mortgage to do more interesting things, whether it be using it for derivatives, whether it be taking loans out against your mortgage and participating in more sophisticated strategies, all from your normal bank account or all from one singular account. I think that's where the future is, where it just starts to blur the lines between TradFi and DeFi, and you just get more optionality, more access, and more opportunity moving forward.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to stop this conversation. It's been wonderful, you guys. I've had a lot of fun, just hearing about sort of the future of finance and how it's all kind of coming together here. So thank you, Mirza. Thank you, Shuba, for being here. And then for all those in the audience, thank you guys for being here. And I do just want to plug a couple things. Definitely look into the DAT more. There's some, announcements just above this space to kind of give you all the details on the DAT, who Pineapple is, what they're doing, and that's just a great way to kind of get integrated with the news and start looking into it in greater detail. If you are a developer, we do have two accelerators that are currently in the application phase, both with Cointelegraph as well as Outlier Ventures. So definitely plug in there if you're building, some unique applications. And then finally, if you're going to be in Singapore for Token or KPW next week, we are hosting a couple events there. We'd love to have you guys participate. But we'll go ahead and pause the conversation there and pick up next time. So again, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Mirza. Thank you, Shuba. And we will catch everyone on the next Injective Space.